The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when the heart monitor flatlined for 3 seconds before screaming back to life, its shrill alarm cutting through the trauma bay like a blade. Blood soaked the sheets beneath the wounded Navy SEAL sniper, his breathing shallow, uneven, his skin pale and clammy. 20 of the best doctors in the hospital had already stepped back, shaken, exhausted, defeated. The words no one ever wanted to say hung in the air like a death sentence. There was nothing more they could do. And then, in the middle of the chaos, a rookie nurse whispered his forgotten call sign, and everything changed. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unseen power of compassion, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. The hospital stood on the outskirts of San Diego, a sprawling medical complex that treated both civilians and military personnel. On that night, the emergency department felt like a battlefield of its own. Doctors and nurses rushed between gurneys, trauma carts rattled across polished floors, and the air smelled of antiseptic and iron. At the center of it all lay Senior Chief Aaron Mercer, a legendary SEAL sniper whose name was whispered with reverence in military circles. He had survived countless missions, impossible odds, and brutal combat zones. But now, back home on American soil, his body was failing him after a catastrophic internal injury caused by delayed complications from a classified mission overseas. Aaron had been airlifted in with severe internal bleeding, multiple organ failure, and a heart that struggled to keep a steady rhythm. One by one, specialists had attempted everything modern medicine could offer: emergency surgeries, experimental treatments, advanced life support. Each attempt ended the same way, with grim headshakes and silent prayers. 20 doctors had tried. 20 had failed. Exhaustion and despair had settled over the trauma unit like a heavy fog. In the corner of the room stood a young nurse named Rachel Collins. Fresh out of nursing school, she had only been working in the hospital for 6 months. Her hands trembled as she adjusted an 4-line, her eyes fixed on the broken man before her. Unlike the others, she didn't see a war hero or a hopeless case. She saw a human being fighting for one more breath. Something about his face stirred a distant memory she couldn't immediately place, a tug in her chest that made it hard to look away. As the lead physician prepared to call time of death, Rachel felt a sudden surge of clarity. She remembered a story her father once told her about a young SEAL he had served with years ago, a sniper known not by his real name but by a call sign he carried like a badge of honor. A man who had once saved her father's life during a failed extraction in hostile territory. The name surfaced from the depths of her memory, trembling on her lips. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, her voice barely above a whisper as she leaned close to the unconscious soldier and spoke the call sign, Ghost Hawk. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, impossibly, Aaron's fingers twitched. His chest shuddered as he dragged in a ragged breath. The heart monitor jumped, the line spiking sharply as a stunned silence fell across the room. The doctors froze, staring in disbelief. Against every expectation, his failing heart stabilized, if only slightly. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough to buy precious time. No one could explain why those 2 words had reached him when nothing else could. But Rachel knew. In his subconscious, in the deepest corner of his mind, that call sign represented survival, brotherhood, and a reason to keep fighting. It was the name tied to his identity, the name spoken by men who had trusted him with their lives. Hearing it pulled him back from the edge. With renewed urgency, the medical team rushed to act. New procedures were attempted, blood transfusions intensified, and experimental therapies were greenlit. Over the next several hours, Aaron teetered between life and death. Rachel stayed by his side, barely moving, whispering encouragement, reminding him of who he was, of the lives he had saved, of the people who still needed him. Days passed. Then weeks. Aaron slipped in and out of consciousness, his body fragile, his spirit battered. Rachel became a constant presence, adjusting his blankets, cleaning his wounds, reading letters sent by his former teammates, and sometimes simply holding his hand when the pain became too much. Though hospital policy discouraged emotional involvement, she couldn't bring herself to remain distant. In him, she saw her father's courage, the sacrifices of countless soldiers, and the fragile beauty of a life balanced on a razor's edge. When Aaron finally opened his eyes for longer than a few seconds, the first face he recognized was hers. Confusion flickered across his features, followed by recognition. His lips barely moved, but she knew what he was trying to say. He remembered the call sign. He remembered being called back. Recovery was brutal. Physical therapy pushed him to his limits. Nightmares dragged him back into the darkness of combat. There were moments when despair threatened to swallow him whole, when the loss of his former strength felt unbearable. Each time, Rachel was there, offering steady encouragement, reminding him that surviving wasn't weakness, it was resilience. As weeks turned into months, a quiet bond formed between them. It wasn't romantic at first. It was built on trust, shared vulnerability, and the simple act of showing up when it mattered most. Rachel listened to his stories of fallen teammates, of impossible choices, of the heavy guilt survivors often carried. In return, she shared her own fears, of not being good enough, of making mistakes that could cost lives, of living in the long shadow cast by heroes like him. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, Aaron finally stood on his own for the first time. His legs shook, sweat beaded on his forehead, and pain radiated through his body. But he didn't fall. Rachel stood just inches away, ready to catch him, her eyes shining with pride. In that moment, he understood that survival wasn't just about strength or skill. Sometimes, it was about connection. About someone believing in you when you no longer believed in yourself. Word of his recovery spread through the hospital, then through military circles, and eventually to the public. People called it a miracle. Doctors called it a medical anomaly. Aaron called it a second chance. And in every interview, every quiet conversation, he credited the rookie nurse who refused to let him fade away. On the day he was finally discharged, the entire staff gathered in the hallway. Applause echoed as he walked out under his own power, leaning slightly on a cane. He stopped in front of Rachel, emotion tightening his throat. Without words, he pressed a small, worn patch into her palm, the emblem of his old unit, the symbol of Ghost Hawk. It was his way of saying thank you, of passing on a piece of his legacy. Months later, Aaron began speaking to wounded veterans, sharing his story, reminding them that hope could exist even in the darkest moments. Rachel continued her nursing career, inspired by the life she had helped save. They stayed in touch, their bond unbroken by time or distance. Years after that night, whenever Aaron felt the weight of the past pressing down on him, he would remember the sound of a young nurse's trembling voice calling him back from the edge. And Rachel, in her quiet moments, would remember the night she learned that sometimes, one small act of courage could change the course of a life. If this story touched your heart, moved you, or reminded you of the power of compassion, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive. And before you go, leave a comment below sharing what part of this story moved you the most. Your words might inspire someone who needs them today. Because sometimes, all it takes to save a life is a single voice, a forgotten name, and the courage to speak when everyone else has fallen silent.